Colombia has seen an increase of almost 200% in forced displacements in the first half of 2021, according to the latest report by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. China has slammed the United States' interference in Cuba's internal affairs and urged Washington to end the blockade against the island. The latest victim of Israel's occupation forces in the West Bank was killed during the funeral of another boy killed just the day before. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Colombia, which has seen an increase of almost 200% in forced displacements in the first half of 2021, according to the latest report by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. According to the extensive report, in June alone, there were 9 massive displacements of over 3,000 people in the departments of Antioquia, Nariño and Cauca. Over 44,500 Colombians have been displaced so far this year, as the country continues to see widespread violence by illegal armed groups and a lack of state protection for vulnerable communities. The situation is further aggravated by the impacts of natural disasters and the COVID-19 pandemic. In this context, the humanitarian crisis in a small city on Colombia's Caribbean shore intensifies. More than 10,000 asylum seekers have massed recently in Colombia, where they are stranded as they seek to cross the Gulf of Urabá into Panama en route to the United States. Human rights groups point out that the situation is getting worse, given the critical situation with the COVID-19 epidemic, overcrowding and the collapse of public services in the small city. A day after his inauguration, Peruvian President Pedro Castillo appointed Guido Bellido as his prime minister, described as a socialist and indicating the possible direction of his government. Bellido is the General Secretary of the Free Peru Party in the city of Cusco. He is indigenous Quechua and an economist by profession. According to reports, the appointment has shattered the hopes of Castillo's more centrist supporters. Thousands of locals gathered at the historical site of the Battle of Ayacucho, which sealed Peru's independence from Spain, to witness the swearing-in ceremony on Thursday, which was also attended by several regional leaders. The new Prime Minister must appear before Congress within a month to ask for a vote of confidence. If rejected, President Castillo will have to appoint another PM and reorganize his cabinet. Chile has seen a second day of mobilizations to demand the immediate release of political prisoners arrested during the widespread anti-government protests of 2019. Protesters rallied in front of the National Institute for Human Rights in the capital Santiago to demand the immediate release of the mostly young prisoners kept in preventive detention without trial for almost 2 years. Relatives of those jailed called for the approval of a general pardon bill presented by opposition lawmakers, which has been pending in the National Congress for months. A national strike was called this Friday in El Salvador against President Nayib Bukele's government. The strike action, supported by social movements, student organizations and political organizations, comes on the same day as the annual student march to remember the massacre of students by the military dictatorship at the University of El Salvador on July 30th, 1975. President Bukele now enjoys more power than the majority in parliament following February's legislative elections. Protesters voiced oppositions to plans to amend the constitution, the legalization of Bitcoin, the militarization of the country and political persecution. Three members of the Joint Task Force of Paraguay's army were killed in what's been described as a terrorist attack. Preliminary investigations indicated that a bomb exploded in the path of a patrol vehicle in the northern part of the country, where the guerrillas of the Paraguayan People's Army are active. A task force spokesman said that the truck with only 3 crew members was accompanied by another truck with 6 soldiers who repelled further shots from the attackers. In a bid to strengthen domestic production in the face of US sanctions, the Venezuelan government installed the Superior Council of the Economy this Friday. Seeking import substitution, the Council brings together state and private sector productive forces tasked with boosting national production in a country that is heavily dependent on imports, which have been severely restricted by the aggressive US blockade policy. As part of the initiative, the Centre for National Productive Investment will complement the plans for economic recovery and growth first launched in 2016. Executive Vice President Delcy Rodriguez pointed out that the policies aimed at guaranteeing the market for national products and will include the presentation of the National Public Procurement Bill before the National Assembly.
Venezuela is a country that, despite the aggression from the United States, despite the blockade and the theft of our assets abroad, despite all of this, Venezuela is economically stable in comparison with many other countries, and we are aiming towards gradual growth. All this despite the enormous sacrifice of our people and the critical affectations brought upon them by illegal and arbitrary United States sanctions.
In Guatemala, various social sectors, indigenous and farmers groups began a general strike on Thursday to demand the resignation of President Alejandro Gimatei and the Attorney General, both accused of corruption. Thousands took to the streets in protest over state mismanagement and the government's apparent unwillingness to tackle corruption, which has extended to the lack of transparency in the distribution of vaccines amid the health crisis. Pressure has been building since Attorney General Consuelo Porras fired the country's anti-corruption special prosecutor Juan Francisco Sandoval on July 23rd. Sandoval said after his firing that as his investigations got closer to President Gimatei and members of his cabinet, Porras made efforts to block him. The Brazilian city of Rio de Janeiro is seeing an unusual cold snap, with at least 2 people reported dead and social movements warning of a potential humanitarian crisis for the homeless population. Charities and aid organisations pointed out that the cold temperatures could cause a health crisis due to the amount of homeless people and the lack of infrastructure to provide them with shelter. Volunteers said the harsh weather has hampered the distribution of supplies and hot food to those in need in a city that's used to tropical temperatures. The polar air mass travelling towards the country's centre-south regions this week is slated to bring freezing temperatures to Sao Paulo and Minas Gerais, major producers of key commodities like sugar, citrus fruits and coffee. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. China has slammed the United States' interference in Cuba's internal affairs under the pretext of so-called freedom, human rights and democracy, and urged Washington to end the blockade against the island. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Charlie Shan stressed that the unilateral US sanctions and blockade are the root cause of the medical and energy shortages in Cuba and have seriously violated the Cuban people's rights to development. He stressed that the US should abide by the purposes of the UN Charter and the basic norms governing international relations and heed the calls of the international community to immediately and completely lift the blockade against Cuba and stop its interference in the country. He also reiterated that China is ready to work to contribute to Cuba's efforts to overcome the impact of the COVID-19 epidemic. Russia has called on Azerbaijan and Armenia to refrain from acts that could worsen tensions and reiterated its commitment to support the implementation of the agreements reached following recent clashes. A spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry noted serious concern regarding the recent incidents near the Azerbaijani-Armenian border, expressing condolences to the families of those killed and calling on both sides to resolve all problems through political and diplomatic channels. Russia played a key role in negotiating the end of the conflict over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region last year and continues to work for the implementation of the bilateral accords reached there. In Russia, wildfires in the Siberian region have affected approximately 1.5 million hectares of forest. The Forest Protection Air Service team announced they're patrolling miles of firewalls that have been dug to prevent the flames from advancing. This is the third consecutive year that Russia's coldest region has seen record forest fires that have overwhelmed the Forest Protection Service and seen the military deployed to support the efforts to tackle the blazes. In Turkey, at least 4 people have been killed and almost 200 injured in fires that spread across tourist hotspots on the south coast of the country. Turkish authorities launched an investigation into suspected arson at 4 tourist sites in the city of Antalya. A hotel was being evacuated near the tourist city of Bodrum, some 300 kilometers west of Antalya, as new fires broke out across the southern coast. Images on social media and Turkish TV showed residents jumping out of their cars and running for their lives through smoke-filled streets lit up by orange flames. Japan's coronavirus emergency grows as the Olympic Games continue. Authorities extended the state of emergency to 4 more areas in addition to Olympic host Tokyo on Friday, as COVID-19 cases spike in the capital and around the country, overshadowing the Summer Games. With the Delta variant of the coronavirus at large, the nationwide count of cases topped 10,000 for the first time on Thursday. Although infection and death rates are relatively small in comparison to more exposed countries, health officials warned that hospital capacity could be pushed to the limit if cases continue to climb. Meanwhile, the Tokyo Games organisers announced 27 new COVID-19 cases linked to the Olympics on Friday, including 3 athletes, the highest daily count so far.
The virus infection is spreading at a rate we have never experienced before. The main reason for this spread is the new Delta variant, which is rampant across the globe.
Indonesia has reported a child mortality rate due to COVID-19 greater than that of any other country, with hundreds of children having died in recent weeks. Many of the victims were under the age of 5, challenging the idea that children face minimal risk from COVID-19, according to doctors. The news comes as the country confronts its biggest surge yet in coronavirus cases overall, and as its leaders face mounting criticism that they've been slow to act. The jump in child deaths coincides with a surge of the Delta variant, which has swept through Southeast Asia, where vaccination rates are low, causing record outbreaks. Over 1.6 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been administered in China, according to information provided by the National Health Commission on Thursday. Multiple regions of the country recently reported locally transmitted COVID-19 cases with the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant. Health authorities reiterated that this is not the time to lower the guard or relax anti-epidemic efforts against the import and local outbreak of cases. Vaccination points have been set up all around China in order to boost the rollout process. A further 60 million vaccine doses will be made available to African countries under the COVAX system. The news was welcomed by the World Health Organization's regional director for Africa, but she stressed that this is nowhere near enough.
To say that it would be progress compared to where we are today, but it would not be going far enough. We've estimated that we need about 820 million doses to be able to reach a coverage level of 30% of the population by the end of the year. So 60 million certainly is a step in the right direction, but it is nowhere near what is needed to reach that ambition, that target by the end of the year. So clearly,
the Caribbean island of Martinique entered a new lockdown this Friday for at least 3 weeks to stem the alarming rise in COVID-19 cases. As a French overseas territory, the French government announced it will send a team of medical personnel and extra ICU beds. Visitors from France will be required to prove they have been vaccinated or have a compelling motive for travel. According to latest data, Martinique has an incidence rate of more than 900 cases per 100,000 inhabitants. Its main healthcare facility, the University Hospital, has reached a saturation point.
It is something that is not avoidable, and there is only one answer. It is vaccination. We know it. So vaccinate yourself, vaccinate yourself. The new lockdown is a hassle for me. I think it's exaggerating. 3,000 asymptomatic cases, right? It's not 3,000 deaths or 3,000 sick people lying in hospital. Maybe they are doing it to prevent it, but for a year, more than a year, it's just too much. We are tired of it. It's time for it to end.
Let's take it as it comes, because there's no point of getting upset. There is no point. You have to follow the instructions, and that's it.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Shawat Khalid Awad is the third young Palestinian to be killed by Israeli fire in the West Bank over the course of this week. He was shot during the funeral of a Palestinian boy killed by occupation forces the previous day. 20-year-old Awad received bullets to the head and stomach on Thursday as Israeli troops shot at Palestinians expressing their anger over the killing of 12-year-old Mohammed al-Alami, who was shot by Israeli troops while travelling in a car with his father in the occupied West Bank town of Bet Ummah, northwest of Hebron. Earlier in the week, 17-year-old Mohammed Muna al-Tamimi died of gunshot wounds suffered in the Palestinian village of Nabi Saleh, northwest of Ramallah. Meanwhile, the Zionist repression of Palestinian protesters continues in Beita, where demonstrations against the latest illegal Israeli settlement have been held, with at least 300 wounded by the Israeli forces. Tunisian President Kais Saied has appointed a new security chief amid the political crisis in the country. Former National Security Advisor Ridhad Salaki was named as the interim interior minister in President Said's first major appointment since he froze parliament and seized executive powers earlier this week amid widespread protests and an economic crisis. The move was denounced by the country's biggest party as a coup, and clashes have been seen between protesters on both sides in recent days. The constitutional crisis comes as Tunisia battles one of Africa's worst COVID-19 outbreaks. Several hundred people marched in Chad's capital on Thursday against the ruling military junta. The opposition Transformers Party and civil society groups called the demonstration against the confiscation of power by the so-called Transitional Military Council that has ruled the country since the death of President Idris Deby in April. They demanded a national conference to overhaul the junta's charter and restore democracy in the former French colony. Some protesters held signs reading "France out of Chad." French President Emmanuel Macron met with the new rulers while attending Idris Deby's funeral, the only Western head of state to make the journey. Though the junta has promised free and transparent elections after an 18-month transition that could be extended, it also dissolved parliament and repealed the constitution.
A feeling of satisfaction because we were able to march without any clashes taking place. We have demonstrated, as Max Loengard said earlier, we are mature, we are capable, we are responsible for carrying out a truly peaceful march, which for once we have been allowed to do. All the Chadians who came out are demanding justice for everyone. They are calling for a sovereign and inclusive national conference, not like the dialogue that excludes the majority of Chadians. Today, we feel that the CMT wants to stay in power forever, not for 18 months, but for 36 months and maybe for another 30 years.
At least 18 civilians were killed in a fresh attack in western Niger near the border with Mali, according to media reports on Thursday. The attack in the Tillabéri region followed a similar one on Sunday that killed 14. Without explaining the circumstances of the attack, a local official said militants were suspected to be responsible. No group has claimed responsibility. Rampant insurgency in the region previously targeted security forces, but this year attacks have targeted civilians amid increasing ethnic conflicts. Previous attacks in Tillabéri have been blamed on an affiliate of the terror group Daesh or the Islamic State. The UN mission in Mali reported that peacekeepers repelled 2 attacks targeting its patrols on Wednesday. The mission, which includes over 18,000 personnel, has seen several attacks in recent months as terrorist groups up their operations in the Sahel region.
The UN mission in Mali reports that yesterday, peacekeepers repelled 2 attacks targeting its patrols. The first took place in Kidal. An armored vehicle was damaged, but there were no casualties. The second attack happened north of Douentza in the Mopti region, in an area where peacekeepers had defused an improvised explosive device earlier in the day. In the past 3 weeks, there have been 15 attacks against peacekeepers in Mali, including 11 that involved improvised explosive devices. 15 mission staff were injured in these attacks, which also caused extensive material damage. Despite these challenges, the mission remains committed to carrying out its mandate and reiterated its support for the full implementation of the peace agreement.
The Afghan government is seeking to drive back the Taliban advance as foreign troops leave. Air raids have killed 65 members of the Taliban and wounded a dozen others, according to the Afghan Defense Ministry. The raids were conducted in Lashkar Gah, capital of Helmand province, in the south of the country. The ministry also informed that in the last 24 hours, over 200 Taliban fighters were killed and over 100 injured in operations conducted by the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces in several provinces of the country. After 20 years of fruitless intervention, the US and NATO are withdrawing their troops from Afghanistan, and the Taliban has been making inroads in retaking control of the nation. The Syrian army has launched an operation against terrorist groups in an area of the country's southwest that has been under siege for over a month. The operation in Deir al-Balad, home to some 40,000 people, began early this Thursday after terrorists persisted in order to surrender their light weapons and cease hostilities. Authorities stated that the offensive will be carried out in different stages, seeking to resume the negotiations for the protection of the civilian population. Meanwhile, the terrorists bombarded Deir neighbourhoods and the local hospital, destroying medical equipment and supplies. And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. Plus, you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.